With reading material like this, it's no wonder children grow up to be cruel, despotic dictators. Hi, welcome to the St. Canard Files, a Darkwing Duck podcast. I'm your host, Mike Russo, and tonight we are talking about Darkwing Duck comics. I have two very special guests with me tonight. First, I have my good friend Andrew Wallace. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Yes, our listeners might remember you from the Up and Awry episode.
Yep, that was so much fun to record.
So thank you for returning.
You're welcome.
We also have another good friend of mine, Stan Lunn, who is, I think, the biggest Mighty Morphin Power Ranger fan I know. Hi, Stan.
Hello, Mike. Hello,
welcome.
Andrew.
Hello, Stan.
So, Stan, you have not been with us before, so I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your history with Darkwing Duck, as well as your favorite villain and episode.
All right. Back in 1991, when Darkwing Duck first started airing, I would come home from school to watch it because my school life was not the most pleasant. I got bullied a lot, and Darkwing was an escape from the reality that was school. I kind of looked up to him in a lot of ways.
So that Duck Knight Returns episode must have been very meaningful to you when you saw it.
It definitely struck a few familiar chords, yes.
So what's your favorite villain in your favorite episode, Stan?
Well, my favorite villain has to be Lord Negaduck. And my favorite episode is definitely Life, the Negaverse, and Everything.
Aha, you are speaking my language, Stan. All right, so welcome, guys. It's really good to have you on tonight. So, Darkwing comics. You guys own them. I own them. It's Darkwing, Darkwing and comics go together. Comics, especially the Silver Age ones, were the big inspiration for the creator Tad Stones. And a lot of what he did with Darkwing Duck was based on what he knew from the Silver Age comics. So Darkwing and comics, they go together perfectly, don't they?
Oh, yes.
They do.
So let's start from the very, very, very beginning. If you were into Darkwing Duck or Disney Afternoon or just Disney in general in the late 80s, early 90s, you probably had some comics published by Disney themselves, their Disney Comics publishing arm. They picked up the license from Gladstone in the late 80s, and they turned out a ton of titles, including Mickey Mouse comics, Donald Duck comics, Uncle Scrooge comics, of course, Walt Disney Comics and Stories, stuff like Roger Rabbit comics, DuckTales comics, Rescue Ranger comics, Tailspin comics, adaptions of movies like Little Mermaid and DuckTales the movie, a lot of stuff from Disney Comics, and stuff that's still pretty easy to find, actually. But in 1991, they, of course, tackled Darkwing Duck with a 4-issue limited miniseries based on Darkly Dawns the Duck. Stan, how about you tell us a little bit about those comics?
Well, as Mike said, there were 4 of them. The first issue is kind of notable for the fact that it had an error on the front where Darkwing was not wearing his mask either in the main picture or the headshot in the corner.
How does something like that slip through quality control?
It happens a few times, and it's going to come up again a couple times later.
But it's the cover of the first issue. It's like forgetting to draw the cowl on Batman.
It sticks out like such a sore thumb.
Yeah, and it must have been a painting issue because, like you said, on the very top left cover, the little icon, he doesn't have the mask on that one either.
Nope, but they definitely corrected it for the remainder of the issues.
Definitely.
Must have been some major miscommunication.
Well, like I said, Disney Comics was publishing so much stuff. Their quality control was probably pretty lax. But it's a pretty good adaptation of those 2 episodes. I mean, when they did the Rescue Rangers adaptation of To the Rescue, they tried to cram 5 episodes into 2 issues. And when they did Plunder and Lightning, they put 4 episodes into 4 issues. That makes sense. Here, they're taking 2 episodes and putting it into 4 issues. So, like, all the dialogue, all the action, everything makes it into this adaptation. And they even add more dialogue and more stuff just to beef it up a little bit. I highly recommend these comics. The art was by a man named John Blam Moore. He passed away recently. It's a shame because I like his style. Stan, what do you think of his style?
I thought it was very well done.
It's very silly, but it works.
Yeah.
Like a lot of it's like super off model, but he just kind of gets the spirit of Darkwing Duck. He really does. And what I heard, he didn't even see a finished episode. He probably had to do this before the episodes were done. All he was given was storyboards to go off of. So with that in mind, he had basically come up with his own style for this. And I think these comics look really cool.
Yeah.
Was it more rubber hose looking?
Very rubber hose looking.
Okay.
But it works. It works. And these comics are also worth getting because a few of them, I don't know if all of them do, a few of them end with an interview with Jim Cummings.
Issue number 1 does.
Yes, I think one of the Tailspin issues has an interview with him as well.
Yep, the second the interview with him is on issue number 6 of Tailspin.
Because I think that one he's mainly talking about Don Carnage, and he talks more about Darkwing in the Darkwing issue. So that's cool to have. Definitely one of the earliest interviews with Jim about Darkwing Duck, which is cool to have. It's like a capsule in time. And they're great comics to have because this is where it all begins. You know, just Darkwing in comics. This is where it got started. Disney Comics had a plan to do more, but everything just imploded at Disney Comics right around the time the Darkwing issues were coming out. I think they were doing too much, and the market couldn't handle it, and they ended up canceling all their like non-Mickey and Donald and Uncle Scrooge comics, like all the Rescue Ranger and Tailspin comics. I know like there were comics that were done that never got printed because it was abruptly. Like they had previewed the next issues and just everything was canceled. And if that hadn't happened, we might have gotten a lot more Darkwing comics out of Disney Comics. It's just they canceled everything and that was it. And they hung on for a few more years with their Mickey and Donald and Uncle Scrooge stuff. But eventually they folded. I don't remember which company picked up the license after that. But luckily for us 90s kids, right, Stan? There were other ways to read Darkwing Duck comics.
The next one that came out pretty much around the same time was Colossal Comics, which was also put out by Disney Comics.
Right. Colossal Comics were like digest size editions. I don't really know if they do digest comics these days, but these were like little TV guide size comic magazines with a variety of comics in them. Everyone had a Darkwing comic in it. There were Tailspin comics, Rescue Ranger comics. What other stories were in there, Stan?
Well, Darkwing actually didn't show up till issue number 4. The first 3 issues do not have Darkwing.
Oh, right. I remember that. Okay, I think my first issue might have been one of the Darkwing ones.
But yeah, I think about issue number 4 also, reprints the 4-issue miniseries, the Darkly Dawns the Duck.
Oh, does it?
Yep. Then issue number 5 had the Justice Ducks.
Yes, Justice Ducks got comic adaptation as well, also drawn by John Blair Moore. Those are fun. That's fun. It's just fun to see like the actual episodes in comic book form. Those are fun. I do enjoy those.
Another cool thing about the Colossal Comics is a lot of them had very, special art for the front. Like issue number 9 had both Darkwing and Goofy swinging on ropes above the Audubon Bay Bridge. And issue number 8, if I remember correctly, had the Little Mermaid with a Darkwing statue.
Well, wasn't it the Little Mermaid statue and Darkwing was underwater in a tank top and his boxer shorts?
I believe there's a cover like that as well, yes.
That's some cool art. I do remember. I know I have some of those still. But yeah, those digests had a whole bunch of comics of all different characters. Again, Darkwing, Goof Troop, Rescue Ranger, Tailspin, all the different shows.
I
But
think
that was
Bonkers.
Bonkers too.
I think so.
I don't remember Bonkers being around at the time, but I really didn't collect all the Colossal comics. I know you do, so I will definitely take your word on that. It makes me more willing to track those down if Bonkers was in there too. And there was another way to read Darkwing Duck comics back then, wasn't there, Stan?
Yes, there was.
So what was the other way to do it?
Well, there was the 2 graphic novels they created called Cartoon Tales.
Now, one of them adapted the Justice Ducks. Justice Ducks was in one of them, correct?
Yes.
What was in the other one?
The other one, which was called Darkwing Duck Returns, Capes and Capers, had stories that were from our next source we'll talk about, but they had the Liquid Diet, which is a very special Darkwing comic. They had the Found World and the Kitty Cat Caper, which we will also touch on a lot more later.
Yeah, these are pretty notable. The Found World is probably the least notable, but it was another John Blair Moore story. It's a really short story, but it has more of his art. Yes, the Kitty Cat Caper, that comes back like years from there. It comes back.
Yeah.
But the other one, Liquid Diet, we can talk about that now. That is special. Why is that special, Stan?
That is special because it is a sequel to the Liquidator's origin episode done by the creators of the Liquidator.
Yes, it was written by Kevin Campbell and Brian Swenlin, who wrote Dry Heart. And this is actually a really good story. It would have adapted well into the TV show. It would have.
Yeah.
Oh, a lost episode it could have been.
Who knows? It could have been a script. We don't know. I may have to ask one of them. They're both on Facebook. The basic story is Liquidator's gone straight, or has he? He's selling his water again, but his water has a special ingredient that turns people into water beings just like himself.
Yeah.
After not trusting him for a bit, Darkwing gives in, drinks the water, and also becomes a water being. And like always, it's up to Honker to save the day. It really plays like an episode of the show. Add a few more comic scenes into it, a few more bits of business, it would have been an episode. So, of course, there was one other way to read Darkwing comics, and it's something all 90s kids remember. All 90s kids. What was it, Stan?
Disney Adventures Magazine.
Yeah. I think most of our listeners right now are saying to themselves, I had those, because I certainly did. Stan, really quickly, tell our listeners who didn't have these what Disney Adventures actually was.
So Disney Adventures was a digest-sized magazine, similar in size to the Colossal comics, that featured stories and comics from everything to do with Disney. Like, you'd have an issue with comics from Darkwing Duck, Tailspin, and DuckTales, and Rescue Rangers. You'd also have stuff about, maybe the lifestyle of bugs, or, stuff happening on TV, or, cool tips for kids about video games.
And Disney Adventures reported on all pop culture stuff. There were Simpsons articles, Power Ranger articles, Jurassic Park articles, because Disney Adventures started in the early 90s, and they went into, the mid-2000s?
I think up to 2005-ish.
Oh, there you go. They hit everything. They weren't afraid to cover things by other companies either. But for our purpose...
Y'all are making me wish I grew up in the 90s.
It was a good time. It was a good time, Andrew. But for our purposes, the big thing about Disney Adventures were the Darkwing comics. This is where the bulk of the Darkwing comics actually came from. Before we get into those, a lot of Disney comics issues had really cool covers. A lot of them took a drawing of a character and put it up against a live-action celebrity. Like you might have Darkwing with MC Hammer, or Pete from Goof Troop with Tim Allen. All crazy stuff like that. And the covers always caught my attention as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, where else are you gonna have Jafar facing off against Darth Vader?
Nowhere but Disney Adventures. Nowhere else but there. But there were a lot of Darkwing comics in Disney. I think he ended up getting the most comics in Disney Adventures.
Believe so. He had 35 comics in the
That's a lot. But it ran the gamut from like multi-page stories to like one-page comics.
Yeah.
There were a lot of fun comics in Disney Adventures, I'll tell you that. Like the short ones, one of my favorites is one where Tuscanini and Negaduck are playing cards, and neither of them can win because they both keep cheating. And there's another one where Negaduck he bribes Morgana to make him scare people with just a look, and to put him in a place where lots of people are there to scare. So she puts him in a house of mirrors, so he scares himself.
And I will say my favorite story they did in Disney Adventures for Darkwing was called Vogue's Gallery, where Darkwing had to fight the living clothes of his enemies, like Ammonia Pine's outfit, Megavolt's outfit, and of course the most evil outfit of all, Negaduck's outfit.
I've seen that one. Like they did some really crazy things with these comics. They really did. There was one story, I forgot what it was called, where Steelbeak captures Darkwing and turns him evil. And Darkwing is like super evil. Like he's yelling at Launchpad, he's gonna eat his heart out. Like crazy dark stuff like that. And Disney Comics, the writers had a penchant for coming up with new villains.
Yeah, one of which that would return many years later got his first start from Disney Adventures.
Who is this?
Fluffy.
Fluffy, yes. We'll get back to Fluffy. We're going to put a pin in Fluffy. There was also Racer Rabbit. There was Poker Face, a villain who had a serum that made people addicted to gambling. You probably couldn't do that now.
Probably not.
And there was a dark
comic. Yeah, sure.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that, Andrew. And then there was even a Darkwing comic in 3D, where he fought a 3D villain. He got sucked into the 3D world. So there was some cool Darkwing comics. I want to talk about one of the coolest things that Disney Adventures ever did with the comics. It was called, and this was like toward the end, like around 1995, I'd say.
1994.
Oh, so close. It was called The Legend of the Chaos God. Stan, would you like to tell our listeners what that was?
It was a 5-part crossover series that had Tailspin began it. Then it jumped ahead to Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers.
Right.
Then Goof Troop, then DuckTales, and then finally Darkwing Duck.
Yeah, for the most part, the characters didn't meet each other, but one thing led to another. The whole idea was there was a villain from centuries ago his soul now is in an amulet, correct?
Yeah.
And if a character touches the amulet, he ends up possessing you.
Or the chain that the amulet is on.
Right. So in the Tailspin one, he possesses Rebecca. And Tailspin has to happen first because they're very smart with it. Because Tailspin happened like in the 30s. It has to happen first.
Right.
The second storyline, he possesses Dale, correct? Which is the only one that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me continuity-wise, because Chip and Dale's universe is set in the human world. But they don't really get into it, you know? The next one is, of course, Goof Troop, and it possesses Pete's new car. And finally, DuckTales. What is the villain? What was his name? Salijo? What does he possess in the DuckTales story?
If memory serves me right, didn't he possess the Gizmo Duck suit?
Yes, he does. And then we end up in part 5 where Darkwing, Launchpad, and Gizmo Duck have to team up to defeat the villain. And it was cool. And from what I've heard, Aaron Sparrow, the writer of a lot of the newer comics, wanted to adapt that. He wanted to expand on that. He just never got a chance to. That's really cool.
That's a shame.
I urge everybody to try to find those because that's a really cool story. I would definitely recommend it. But eventually all the Disney afternoon shows ended. They weren't, as known anymore. Their light faded. So all that stuff disappeared from Disney Comics. They moved on to Kim Possible Comics, Pixar Comics, all the newer stuff. So our story with Disney Comics kind of ends there, but enter Marvel.
Yep.
So Stan, briefly, tell us a bit about the Marvel Disney Afternoon Comics, because you're the only one of the three of us who owns those.
So the Disney Afternoon from Marvel Comics was a 10-issue series. Darkwing is on the cover of every single issue in some form or another. And every issue has a story with Darkwing, even though at least one of those issues has the story is just a single page.
But Darkwing Space sells comics.
Yep.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
And I will say some of the art was a little strange. Like the very first issue had the Fearsome Five, but Quackerjack and Negaduck are drawn so weirdly. Like Quackerjack is green and Negaduck is like yellow and purple.
That is the only issue I actually do own. Another John Blair Moore, storyline. Yes, Quackerjack is painted very weird, but I'll give it. This is one of the first times I remember seeing Negaduck with sharp teeth. But what other kind of things happened in the Marvel Disney Afternoon comics, Stan?
Well, they had stories from all the other Disney Afternoon era shows. So they had DuckTales comics, they had Goof Troop, Bonkers, Chip and Dale.
I think what these comics are most infamous for is the fact that they're so hard to find.
Yeah, especially issues 7, 9, and 10. Issue 10 goes for usually $50 and up.
Yeah. And I think these flew under the radar because by the time they started getting published, the Disney Afternoon was kind of on its way out. And none of these shows were producing new episodes anymore. So I think people just weren't paying attention to it. And of course, the later issues were probably just sold less. They probably made less of them.
Right.
And that's probably why they're so expensive. And you mentioned issue 7 has blue on the cover.
Yep.
Right. So when you pull Tailspin fans into it, you get more people who want it as well. I mean, I don't have those. I'd like to pick them up. I just don't want to pay what some of these issues are worth.
Well, the one thing I will give people hope on is that you can still find them sometimes for a cheap price. Like I found my issue number 10 at a local comic store who had it in the $2 box.
Wow.
He didn't know what he had, and I didn't know until I bought it, because it was Darkwing. Obviously, I was going to buy it.
Yeah. It's just kind of cool that Disney Afternoon got their own dedicated comic book line. It's just too bad it happened so late. So it's funny, Marvel had a little hand in Disney stuff way before Disney bought them.
Yeah.
If only that can happen now. But, the comic industry is not what it used to be. So I'm not anticipating that. But we're going to fast forward quite a bit now.
Not quite yet.
No? Oh, I forgot something you wanted to talk about, Stan. Take it.
There is one other comic that came out back in the day for Darkwing. It was a book put out by Golden Books called Darkwing Duck Comics to Color, which featured a fold-out black and white comic that you could color in with games and puzzles on the back. The story was called High and Dry and featured Steelbeak stealing all the water in St. Canard.
I don't even want to know how he did that.
It's an oddity to be sure, but
hey, the ability to color your own comics, that's pretty cool. So, now we're going to fast forward about 15 years. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about the whole backstory here, but Aaron Sparrow, a man named Aaron Sparrow, a wonderful man named Aaron Sparrow, who we're very thankful pushed for this, he wanted to do a Darkwing Duck comic. He loved Darkwing. He wanted to continue the story of Darkwing Duck. He had it in his head for years, a whole storyline he wanted to do with Darkwing. It was just a matter of getting it done. Now, if you want to hear about the whole story right from Aaron Sparrow's mouth, I urge everyone to pause this, go find our virtual panel on YouTube, the one Will broke his back on months ago putting together. It's about 20 minutes of Aaron Sparrow talking about how badly he wanted to get Darkwing Duck back in the comics, how much he had to fight for this, how everybody at the comic book company he worked at, Boom Studios, wanted him on Muppets comics and wanted him to do Pixar stuff, and he wanted Darkwing, and by a miracle, he was finally given a shot. So please listen to that, from Aaron Sparrow's own words, and then come on back and join us for the next part of this discussion. So guys, the Boom comics. I think we're all thankful these even existed.
Yes.
Because this is where I think Darkwing Duck just started to come back into modern usage. Because before this, I think the whole Disney Afternoon thing was dead for the most part. And I think this was a big part of what brought him back, you know? So the Boom comics. Andrew, I want you to jump in here because now you have these comics. You want to tell us a little bit about these comics?
Well, they start off with Darkwing's working a day job. He's hung up the cape and cowl, mask, and big floppy hat. And guess who he's working his day job with?
Elmos Butterspark, also known as
Megavolt.
See, the thing to remember with what Aaron Sparrow did is that this picks up right after the series with about a year gap in between. This isn't a re-envision. This isn't a reboot. This isn't DuckTales 2017. This is just the Darkwing Duck we know and love continued, basically. So Andrew, he's working this day job. Why does he have to do that?
Well, it turns out Negaduck figured out who Darkwing was because of Launchpad's bumbling.
Mm-hmm.
And Darkwing wanted to protect everyone he knew and loved because he didn't want them to be in danger.
Right. So Darkwing enrolled Goslin into a private school. Mm-hmm. He cut ties with Launchpad and Morgana and got a job at Quackworks, this mysterious company that sprung up overnight, basically put all the police out of work with their own crime bots, stopped crime completely. Even the criminals work for this company. There is no Darkwing Duck. And
barely anyone remembers him.
And no one remembers him. And this whole thing, Aaron Sparrow came up with the story by himself. This is his baby. He didn't write for the Boom comics. Another writer named Ian Brill did. But the art, let's talk about the art, of course. Stan, who did all of the art for the Boom comics?
James Silvani.
Oh, this guy's a master, isn't he?
Yes, he is. His art is incredible. Everything always seems to just be leaping off the page.
And at least in the Boom comics, Silvani had this great knack of hiding Disney Easter eggs in the background. Like, he was great at that. If it was a scene set in a school and there were, like, posters on the wall, you would see Disney characters. If a character was on a building, there would be, like, a gargoyle in the background. Oh, he was such a great artist. He's still, drawing Darkwing stuff at conventions. He'll sign your copies of your comics with little Darkwing Duck pictures. I have a print he made. He was an amazing artist. And, but, the only downside is that Aaron Sparrow only got to really ghostwrite the first story arc, and he didn't stick around. And many people will say the stories did kind of suffer in his absence. I don't know if you guys agree, but that's the prevailing attitude about that.
I will say I do agree, having read the Definitively Dangerous edition where he got to go in and fix the story.
Thank goodness.
So let's run down the history of what Boom did with the Darkwing Duck stories. So our first story arc, the Fearsome Five minus Negaduck, they get back together for a crime spree. They get back at all their all their old bosses.
Quackerjack in charge.
Quackerjack is in charge. And Quackerjack is PO'd at Negaduck after Negaduck ripped up Banana Brain. So Quackerjack comes up with a robot Banana Brain, like Mecha Banana Brain.
He's made of hate and wires.
I'm made of hate and wires. And, of course, Darkwing and Launchpad reconcile. And who is the big bad? Who was in charge of Quackworks?
Everyone's
And
favorite Tim Curry character,
who is that, Andrew?
Taurus Bulba.
Yeah, so Taurus Bulba came back, gunning for the Gizmo Duck suit, and the new code word to make it work, which was Keen Gear. Whole backstory with Bulba and Gyro and the Gizmo Duck suit. We don't need to really go into it, but suffice it to say, Goslin ends up in the Gizmo Duck suit, and so she calls herself Gosmo Duck. They do defeat Bulba, and they move on to story arc number 2, which is I think is most people's favorite. Wouldn't you say, Stan?
It's certainly my favorite of the boom arcs.
And this one is called Crisis on Infinite Darkwings. This one has, who are the bad guys in this one? Stan?
Evil Darkwings, along
Yeah.
with the masterminds of the whole thing, Magica Dispel and Negaduck.
Yeah, Negaduck's really using Magica's ability to mind control, coupled with his ability to jump around different dimensions, to capture every dimension's version of Darkwing Duck, hypnotize them, and send them loose in St. Canard to ruin his reputation. Very cool story.
Including Darkwing Bowling Ball.
Darkwing Bowling Ball. How can we forget Darkwing Bowling Ball? What are you? Are you a living bowling ball? I think I am. But this is the one with all the crazy Easter eggs. They got Darkwing Doubloon in there, Dark Warrior Duck, of course, Demolition Duck, a Darkwing as the Flying Monkeys from Wizard of Oz, Sailor Moon Darkwing, Silver Surfer Darkwing. It's really crazy. It's really insane.
Let's not forget my favorite, Darkwing Duck.
Oh yeah, there's even a Doctor Who Darkwing. And you
Indiana Jones one and a Chip and Dale one.
Timon and Pumbaa one too. It is really insane. And Morgana comes back. Darkwing gets back together with her. And of course, leads to a big confrontation with Negaduck and Magica. But as Ian Brill loved to do, not something I'm hugely fond of, he always throws a curveball in the last issue of the story arc. Because each of these story arcs were 4 issues. What happens at the end of the story, Andrew? Who comes back?
Well, it's Paddywhack.
Paddywhack comes back.
Oh, yeah.
And absorbs with Negaduck and becomes a giant, sharp-toothed Negaduck monster attacking the city. And they defeat him by zapping him with the Tron Splitter. And then Paddywhack takes the Tron Splitter and hits Negaduck over and over and over and over again until he turns into tiny particles and floats away. Remember that. That's important. So that was Crisis on Infinite Darkwings. Now we move on to the next story arc. It's called Foul Disposition. Stan, tell us what this story arc is about.
Basically, if anyone has ever read H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, we get Duck Thulu, a creature right out of Lovecraftian horror.
Duck Thulu for sure.
Yeah. And we get to see Steelbeak team up with Darkwing.
Not a pairing I'm very fond of, because it doesn't let Steelbeak be Steelbeak, honestly. But it's all right. We also get a little action from Ammonia Pine, Hotshot, and Flygirl. And Goslin gives up the Gosmo Duck suit, and she becomes Quiverwing Quack is back.
Yep.
And the Arrow Kid.
Kid.
So this one kind of sets up Morgana isn't too happy with how the relationship is going. She feels like Darkwing is kind of prioritizing the superhero stuff because he's keeping his quote-unquote friendship with Steelbeak a secret. And she feels left out. And eventually, yes, Duck Thulu does rise. And this is where my issues with Ian Brill come up. A lot of his writing is very cryptic and very heavy. Like very dramatic, more dramatic, I think, than Darkwing Duck really needs. And they go into like who he is, what happens if things get too like if he gets in too deep, will he turn out like Negaduck? Will he turn out like Dark Warrior Duck? It's a little much, I would say, the story. I think it's where the Boom comics start to lose their way. Stan,
Right.
what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely not one of my favorite arcs, to be
Andrew,
sure.
how do you feel?
I mean, this is closer to the tipping point when you kind of feel like it's just going further away from the first few arcs, and you can tell with Sparrow's absence.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's always good to see Steelbeak, but at first I wasn't into the whole Duck Through idea,
Yeah.
but I mean, it grew on me a little bit, but just one of the arcs out of it, I mean, it's okay.
They come up with a new character too, a double crossings foul agent named Femapil, who's a fox.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never really warmed up to her,
Yeah.
and of course, just like the last story arc, it ends with a big monster, which is Duck Thulu, and Magica defeats him, and basically poofs away.
You mean
Morgana. I'm so sorry. Morgana and Magica both start with M and have G's in their name. I have done this before. Sorry, guys. And so Morgana poofs away. She's gone. No one knows where. So that's when we pick up story arc number 4. What was it called? Campaign Carnage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This sets up a story that continues into the next story arc, which we'll get to. There's this weird ink that's causing these new villains to become very fixated on fighting Darkwing Duck. You get One Shot, who's a monkey, a former pitcher, who can only throw who can only throw something once.
Which I really liked his premise and that idea for a character.
As a one-shot villain, he really works. Then there's Cat Tankerus, a little grade school kitten who's in love with Goslin, who gets himself a robot suit and doesn't know why, but he wants to fight Darkwing Duck. That's not as good. But the whole thing really falls apart for me when they decide to make Launchpad the mayor of St. Canard, and him and Darkwing run against each other, and like they end up almost hating each other because they don't realize they have the ink on their fingers.
Right.
And it just doesn't work for me. They bring in Doofus as Launchpad's campaign manager, and I don't like Doofus.
Everyone's favorite DuckTales character.
I know. And it's just, I didn't like this one. They have a new villain called Suffrage. I wasn't feeling her either, and I think this is truly where the Darkwing Boom comics start to fall apart.
Yeah, part of Suffrage's problem, I think, is the fact that they tried to make you think that it was Morgana.
Yeah. It's very, but Ian Brill's writing is very vague, and I could never get behind it. And I think it's a lot more obvious how weak his writing is when we go to the annual, which we haven't mentioned yet. It's a Quackerjack story. It was not the art was not done by Silvani. It was done by a woman named Sabrina Alberghetti, whose art is great. It looks just like the Disney Australia episodes. But without Silvani there, Brill's writing stands out more. And I think the idea of Quackerjack having a girlfriend and then getting a day job, and at the end, he turns himself into a toy because, in his words, this is the best I'll ever be. That's not Quackerjack, man.
No.
Like, I remember the annual more than anything else got a lot of hate when it first came out.
But it had a great cover.
The great cover, yeah. And
it had one other really great story in it, though.
And yeah, the last few pages was a story called, what was it called? Terror of the Time Turtle or something like that?
Which I believe, wasn't that written by Tad Stones?
It was written by Tad Stones himself. Drake and Goslin have never sounded more like Drake and Goslin in a comic book than when Tad is writing their dialogue. That is, if you want to pick up the annual for any reason, pick it up for that story. So as we start wrapping up the Boom years, we get Dangerous Currency. As Darkwing Duck was wrapping up, they did 4 issues of a DuckTales comic. And then issues 5 and 6 was a crossover with issues 17 and 18 of Darkwing Duck. So a storyline called Dangerous Currency that is meant to wrap everything up. Stan, you want to just really briefly give us a storyline for Dangerous Currency?
So basically, it's revealed that the mysterious ink that was creating all the new villains is Ben from the Phantom Blot.
Who was hooked up with Magica.
Right. And it's revealed where Fenton Gizmo Duck has been, that Magica kidnapped him.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually they have to throw in that other curveball that the ink is not actually the Phantom Blot's doing. It's Negaduck.
It's Negaduck. Yeah, when he turned into particles, he became the ink. And wherever Negaduck ended up after being zapped is where Morgana ended up too. Yeah. So at the end, the two of them both come back. But we have like so many characters. They cram in like all the DuckTales characters, the Beagle Boys, the super villains. They have Camille Chameleon, Ammonia Pine, Cinnamon Teal from DuckTales. Like all like Mama Crackshell comes back. Like the only time we see her in a comic, Mama Crackshell. There's a lot going on in this story. But this story arc, this whole Dangerous Currency, also got a lot of hate when it was brand new for just really, really weird writing. And I'm going to go into a little bit of that. When Fenton first shows up, basically, Andrew, what happens between him and Drake?
Well, Drake, for some reason, doesn't remember Fenton at all.
Nope.
And for some reason, Launchpad knows that Fenton is Gizmo Duck.
Yep.
And then Fenton just reveals he's Gizmo Duck to everyone once Scrooge and everyone else arrives.
Yep.
And then Darkwing just reveals his identity too, which is totally out of character.
Yeah, Launchpad's like, you might as well tell him, Scrooge is my friend. And then Darkwing's like, well, I guess you ought to know. I'm Darkwing Duck. And it's just like, that means Huey, Dewey, and Louie and Webby know too. Because they were right there. And it's just so odd that, like, they just blow their secrets like that. Lots of weird things like that in this story. Like, Mama Crackshell seems to not know that Fenton is Gizmo Duck, for example. And the characters really aren't, like, whoever's writing this dialogue, because it was a toss-up between Brill and a writer named Warren Spector, Scrooge doesn't talk like Scrooge. He keeps saying my money over and over. Stan, how does Scrooge talk? Would he say my money?
I'm not entirely sure. It has been a while since I've watched DuckTales, but I don't think he would.
No, he would say, me money bin. And,
that's right.
He'd say, curse me kilts. And in this comic, he's saying, curse my kilts. It's like, have you ever seen DuckTales?
Oh, bless my bagpipes.
Bless my bagpipes, yeah. So this whole story, I'm not gonna go, not gonna go too much more into this, but at the very end, you guys want to find out how they beat Negaduck? They beat Negaduck by Morgana telling Darkwing, I put a curse on him, which will defeat him if you tell him a truth. Darkwing says to Negaduck, I'm going to tell you the truth, Negaduck. You don't let yourself have any friends. That defeats Negaduck. Blew my mind. Negaduck doesn't care if he has friends.
Nope.
It's the novelty of seeing all these characters together is legitimately fun. It really is. But my problem with it is the writing is just really, really off. It really
Very
is.
out of whack.
And it was rushed, and it was published without Disney's approval. And in the end, the decision was made that Dangerous Currency would not be canon to everything else in what Boom had put out. Since it was also one of the last things they published, the trade paperback for Dangerous Currency, I think, is one of the rarest Darkwing-related comics ever put out.
Yeah, I've seen some people charging about $1,000 for it.
Luckily, I remember trying to look for that after I had first gotten my Definitively Dangerous paperback, and I was looking for it, and when I saw it for like $560, I was like, nope. So
individual comics are easier to find and cheaper. I know it's more appealing to have it all in one book, but right. Definitively, yeah, Dangerous Currency is extremely rare and expensive right now. I mean, luckily you can justify not getting it by saying it isn't canon. I don't need it. But we Darkwing fans need everything, don't we?
Yes.
So, a few years pass. Boom Boom loses the license to Darkwing, all the other Disney stuff, and they're done.
So Boom did publish one other thing before they went out.
The Darkwing Classics collection.
Right, which contained, once again, the first 4 original Disney Comics issues and a few of the issues from the Disney Adventures.
Including Liquid Diet and The Found World, and 2 other comics whose names escape me.
The other 2 were Let's Get Fiscal and Turnabout is Foul Play.
Right, Turnabout is Foul Play is the one where Steelbeak makes Darkwing evil, and Let's Get Physical is where Foul kidnaps an accountant with a magical calculator. That one has Grizzly Cough in it.
Right.
Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. Aaron Sparrow and James Silvani still have stories to tell. They still want to do more Darkwing. So they hook up with a small-time publisher called, Stan?
Joe Books.
Joe Books. And their first project is getting all that Boom stuff back in print, but on their terms. They want to rewrite it. They don't like what Ian Brill did. Aaron Sparrow never liked how Ian Brill took his ideas and changed them. So we get the Definitively Dangerous edition, which packs all the Boom stuff except Dangerous Currency. That was published in 2015. A lot of the dialogue has been changed. You can finally hear the characters' voices in your head. Magica talks like Magica. Darkwing goes, yep, 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 yep. All the characters talk like themselves. You can hear it in your head. Even some of the art. A lot of the stuff that Silvani wasn't fond of, he went back and fixed. A few things were changed because Disney wasn't fond of it. Megavolt has a line in the first story arc about Drake working a crappy day job. They got rid of the word crappy. They weren't fond of that. And a reference to how the crime bots had cowboy hats and chains. And Darkwing in the original Boom comic says, I guess someone had a funny way of enjoying the weekend. And they removed that because they thought that was a little too dirty. I think it's funny. But what? I'm sorry, Stan.
I was just going to say they did get rid of some of the gags. Like there's one panel from in the Crisis on Infinite Darkwings where in the original comic issue you see Goslin, sitting at school, and behind her are Pistol, PJ, and Max from Goof Troop, and they redid that. So now it's Mortimer being bullied outside in the playground instead of that scene.
Oh, I did not know that, but I guess it does. I guess it does really fit into like the story arcs of what they were doing there. But it's definitely worth tracking down. The Definitively Dangerous edition has gone up in price quite a bit because it's so much better than the Boom stuff. It's got everything, all 16 issues and the annual. Because it throws out, of course, Dangerous Currency. We don't find out what happened to Quackerjack, Morgana, Negaduck, or Gizmoduck. So all of that has been thrown out.
We do get something else in its place, though.
Yeah, basically an epilogue where basically to symbolize his new priorities, new focus on crime fighting, Darkwing trades the turtleneck for a shirt and tie. And now he's carrying 2 gas guns, Western style. So, and it ends with him basically saying, Morgana, I will find you. Basically.
Yeah.
And luckily, we got more comics out of Joe Books. We got to have more comics. These, I think, are the best Darkwing Duck comics ever made, because now with Aaron Sparrow actually writing from the ground up, along with Silvani helping him write, we have something that's very close to the show in terms of humor and dialogue. These 8 issues that Joe Books did are the ones I recommend picking up. Yeah, definitely, guys.
Knocked it out of the park.
Very much so.
So I don't think, since these are still possible to pick up, the 2 trade paperbacks are not out of print yet. I recommend anybody who wants them, hurry up on James Silvani's website.
Yeah.
What is it called? SilvaniArt.com.
Yep.
Get these before they're gone. He will also sign them and draw a sketch for you. Once they are gone, they're probably going to shoot up in price. So guys, go for it. If you want these, get them now. You'll regret it later. But really quick, there's a story arc where Darkwing is locked inside a jail where all of his villains are. Negaduck lets them all go to attack him. We get the return of Icy Vanderchill. We get the return of Camille Chameleon. The Beagle Boys show up. Poker Face comes back.
Who?
And yeah, he goes, I'm Poker Face. And Negaduck's like, who? And he's like, they made a comic after me. And he's like, yeah. That was the first 3 issues. Great to see all the villains come back. And Negaduck is Negaduck. Like, no explanation how he comes back. He just comes back.
Now, whenever I first started reading this, and when I opened the first page, and I see Launchpad Darkwing and Megavolt on the Electrical Light Parade car from Disneyland, I knew this was going to be amazing.
Yeah. So for time constraints, we do have to start wrapping up our episode. But there were a lot of other great stories. They fought a new villain called the Gnatmare. The story ends with them turning Megavolt into a giant bug zapper. Splatter Phoenix comes back at a comic book convention.
Yeah.
And of course, they adapted an old Disney comic story called The Kitty Cat Caper to introduce a character named Fluffy, which doesn't pay off because unfortunately the comic was canceled after 8 issues. We never find out what Fluffy's up to. We never found out what Negaduck's up to or what Quackerjack's up to. Morgana never does come back. Or the Phantom Blot. The last 2 issues is a 2-part story involving Bushroot and Posey, which kind of reforms Bushroot. It's a really ending where Bushroot and Darkwing are actually talking like man to man about life. And Bushroot's like, I loved Posey. It was hard to let her go. And, they talk about things. But it ends with a joke where Bushroot goes, I'm still going back to jail, aren't I? And Darkwing's like, oh, yeah. It's really, really great. And just, guys, if you're listening, please pick these up. You won't regret it. But unfortunately, the comics were canceled. And Sparrow and Silvani still want to do it again. They still have stories to tell, and I hope they get a chance. But, with COVID having really ruined the comic book industry right now, I don't know if we'll ever get that chance. Fingers crossed. I hope it happens. Hey, if anybody should be in charge of a new Darkwing Duck series, this should be these 2 guys, honestly.
Oh, yes.
But that's Darkwing Duck in comics. That I think that's some of the most quintessential Darkwing merchandise you could own, outside of like the Funkos and the Playmates toys. Like, I think they're the most important the merchandise that's come out in the last 10 years. Like, you got to have these comics. It's like new episodes of the show, honestly. So that's Darkwing in comics. Comic book starring Darkwing Duck. What's the world coming to, right? Now, Andrew, last time we talked, you're not on social media, so the fans can't really find you anywhere. But that's okay.
But you can see me on the Saturday Zoom calls.
Yes, if anybody wants to be on our Zoom calls, contact Will Santana, and he'll get you on, and you can meet Andrew. Stan, how can the fans find you, and do you have anything you want to plug?
Well, the fans can also see me on the Zoom calls.
Right.
I'm usually there every week. In terms of other places, I am on both Facebook and Twitter. I'm on Instagram, but I don't really post anything on there. I have a YouTube page called DMC Jedi Man. But I just post a lot of random stuff on there. And I have a DeviantArt page that is called DMC Jedi.
Cool. Yeah, you guys are just great guys. It's awesome talking to you every Saturday on our Zoom chats. And you guys are true Darkwing fans. It's been wonderful talking to both of you tonight.
Thank you, Mike.
And of course, we are the St. Canard Files, a Darkwing Duck podcast. You can find us on all major podcast apps: Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, Amazon. You can speak into your Alexa. It'll play the newest episode for you there. iHeartRadio, Pandora. Wow, this gets longer and longer every time. We're also on YouTube. You can watch our virtual panel there. Please do for the Silvani and Sparrow interview. And, of course, you can join our Zoom chats every Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can meet Andrew, Stan, Will, me, all of our friends. And our next episode should be a discussion about the Capcom NES Darkwing game. We're throwing that one back to Will and his video game friends. They did the TurboGrafx episode. They're doing the Capcom NES Darkwing episode. So stay tuned for that one. And again, Andrew, Stan, thank you so much for being my guests tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
So with that said, I think everyone have a good night and stay dangerous.
Good night, y'all.
Stay dangerous, everyone.